Hi everybody, welcome to IronViz, Behind the Build. My name's Andy Cotgreave, I'm co-host of IronViz and evangelist at Tableau. And IronViz is the world's preeminent data visualization competition. This year, over 300 people entered a feeder competition from which 3 lucky winners got to duke it out on stage live at Tableau conference to find out who was the best person using Tableau to craft an incredible data story. What you're about to watch is one of the finalists, Kimberly Scott, live talk through the 20-minute build that she created to show on stage. And she's doing that with her Sous Vizzer, Tableau's Nina Nguyen. And it's a really good conversation. You're going to hear about where the inspiration for the story came from, the impact that had on people who watched the story live at conference, how data prep helps Kimberly do the work, and what's it like being on stage and part of the live IronViz experience. So sit back, enjoy, and I'll hand you over to Nina.
Thanks, Andy, for the introduction. It's nice to see you again. And Kimberly, hi. Nice to see you again as well. Yeah, this is exciting. I've been looking forward to, be part of this session, and we get to talk about what you've done in more detail. And for those who are keen to learn, this is just the perfect opportunity for you to share what you've done with them. So let's get started.
Yeah, let's jump right in. So I'm going to press play and let's go for it. Okay, so I can't believe I actually was going this fast. There was so
You were a machine.
Yeah, well, I was just like in the zone, even with everything going on. You kind of have to be when you're doing this kind of thing. But just, looking back now, I'm just like, look how fast I'm going. Like, normally when I work, I'm not this fast. So it did take a while for me to, practice with speed to be able to, do what I had to do in that 20 minutes. And as I was practicing, I was making notes, timing myself, how long it would take to do each graph and each chart. And every time I practiced, I got quicker and quicker. So I've got like this table that shows me how quick I've gone. As I went through the practice build. But funnily enough, when we were on stage, it was the longest that I'd taken to build the viz. Just and we will probably see I just did run into a few issues.
But okay. I mean, all the preparation being done, and you're just setting yourself up. And in terms of the data prep that you did, because you just pulled the extracts in, did you have to do a lot of data prep? What sort of steps did you take?
So my data prep was quite simple. I didn't do, as you saw, my graphs are quite simple. It didn't require much data prep. It's all kind of like inbuilt within Tableau. I just knew that, like I said, I'm not quick when it comes to Tableau, so I wanted to do something simple. So in terms of data prep, it was mainly just removing columns that I didn't need. We got two CSV files provided to us, and there were quite a lot of columns that I didn't need in my data set. So I deleted them. I renamed some of the column headings just so that they were nice and user friendly. Because the data set was quite, the names were quite long. And what I actually did also do is create a second data set, which you'll see here, called the pivot extract. And that just allowed me to create the slope graph. So the data needed to be in a certain way to be able to create that slope graph. So I just pivoted the data, and that provided the structure for that. But yeah, in terms of data prep, very, very minimal.
And so obviously, sorry. What are you going to say, Kimberly?
I'm just like, if you compare it to what CJ and Will did, I know they did quite a bit of data prep in terms of data identification and the like to kind of get their custom charts.
That's a fair point, but I also think there was, because we've been on this journey together, I knew that your starting point wasn't this, right? So you got to this point where you got to the story you wanted to tell, and ultimately the viz that you created. That wasn't what you started. So you did start with a totally different point, right? So how did you what was that journey like for you?
So it's kind of like any journey. You kind of finish off at a different point where you start. So the data set was quite overwhelming, and when I looked at it, I did start playing around with it in Tableau to see what kind of story I could tell. And what really kind of stood out to me were the differences in literacy rate across the country, across different areas, different regions of the world. So I started kind of looking at that, and I know I shared that with you, Nina, but we were kind of not satisfied with that because we wanted a story, something that we could kind of bring out and kind of pinpoint and focus on, something not so kind of widespread, so to speak. So so first, I had this idea of looking at the countries that had high literacy rates versus the countries that had low literacy rates, and I kind of didn't like that either. I started to kind of put something together, and it didn't kind of click with me. And then one night, I was putting my youngest to bed, and she'd fallen asleep, and I'm like, it just kind of came to me, like, sometimes when you're just doing something like, totally unrelated, and then you just have this brainwave. So maybe she kind of triggered off this brainwave, because I know that, my kids were born in Australia, and so they've got this privilege of being born in a country where education is so freely available. But then I thought about, okay, well, my parents, they had an education, but it's not like what it is here in Australia. So what if I looked at the literacy rates of Australia versus Cambodia? And at that point, I didn't know what the literacy rates were and whether there would be a difference. And so the next day, I jumped into the data set, and there was quite a big discrepancy, not as big as I would have liked, but the discrepancy was there. And then when I looked at some of the other metrics like life expectancy and fertility rate, that kind of solidified my story, and I thought, this is it, this is my story. And yeah, from there it did click, and I was able to kind of put together this this long form viz that kind of guided the viewer through the story of, okay, what are the differences between Australia and Cambodia? This is what my life is like now, but what could it have been like if we didn't come to Australia? So that's kind of how the story came about. Yeah.
No, I do remember the moment when it clicked for you, and I guess that's the most important thing about and it was the coolest thing to see, because in many ways this is a very creative endeavor, and you're not just showing off your skills technically, but you're also creating something quite beautiful. And so it was just, for me, it's like a work of art, really. And so for me to see that, it clicked for you as the artist, as I think about it, and when you found that idea that really hits you and really is meaningful to you, it was really nice to see. So
Yeah, so I think like looking back at my other visitors, I think the most powerful ones are the ones where I put myself in the story. And I think as analysts, and when we work with data, it's kind of hard for us to see that behind the data that there are behind the numbers that there are people. And this was kind of a way to put myself in the story, but also provide like a human face to the numbers as well.
Absolutely. And like I said, it just clicked beautifully. So now that you've at this point in the build, we can see that you've pretty much got most of your sheets built, and then you're starting to populate the dashboard with the sheets. So when you decided to go with this, this color scheme, and the fact that all the text, you didn't prepare a background, with it is not just an image, you're having to kind of copy and paste everything in here. What was your main consideration, and like what drove you to these design decisions?
Yeah, so I think when I was preparing for this, I was looking at watching some of the old videos and looking at some of the vizzes that the previous viz contestants had done, and I did notice that the text was included in the background, and I see why they've done that, because it's a lot quicker. Adding these text boxes took I don't know, about around 20 30 seconds to copy and paste the text in, reformat it, and reposition it. But for me, I wanted to make my viz as accessible as possible. So if I have text in my background, unless I put that block of text as in the alt tags, screen readers are not going to be able to read my text. So this was a deliberate decision in order to make the viz as accessible as possible, and that's one of the ways that I did that via the text boxes. And then another one is the show hide containers that I've used. That's all navigatable and clickable if you're using your keyboard as well. So that's one thing that I wanted to ensure, that the viz was as accessible as possible, that I could build something in 20 minutes. And it did add in some extra time in the build, but I think that was time well spent.
No, absolutely. And I know you'd said before that, you're not that quick when you're working with Tableau. I mean, you're just being modest, just watching you. But
I love the practice.
But just on the point of time, then, I mean, the competition format is what it is, and we have 20 minutes to build the viz, and you had to take that into consideration when you created the viz, as well as when you practice and so on. If you had more time, if you had an hour, if you had 2 hours, what would you have done differently? What would you have loved to have done with the viz additionally? Or just, what would you have done differently?
So I think in terms of the color scheme and the layout and the mood I wanted to convey, I think I did that quite well. But if there's anything I would add, I know when I did my presentation, I had a lot of context. So I talked about my life and the differences in poverty in Cambodia. So I think if I had more time, I would probably incorporate some of that into the viz. So maybe like call out boxes or annotations, or just another kind of show hide container where the viewer can kind of click on a button which provides more context around the figures and why the figures are the way that they are. So I think if I had more time, I'd probably do that.
Yeah, no, fair point. And your presentation was really rich, and it for me, it complemented the viz really, really well. But yeah, it would be awesome to see even more, I guess, not to take away from what you've done at all, but I guess if we're talking about an hour, then it's a different story.
Yeah, exactly. So lots more time to play, and I think the presentation, like you said, it did add a lot more context to the viz, and to be able to put that in there, because not everyone's going to watch the presentation, and not everyone's going to have access to it when they're looking at the viz. So for having that extra information, I think would be good. Yeah.
So now for the people keen to learn a little bit more about why you like show and hide containers and containers in general, because containers are personally my favorite Tableau feature. And I think that horrifies a lot of people to hear, because for a lot of people that I've spoken to, it's almost is the bane of their existence. But look, I really do like using them effectively. But I guess for you, what's the one tip that you'd share? What is it that you like about it so much? And what would be the tip that you'd share that would help a lot of people learn to use containers better in Tableau?
That's a good question. So I don't use containers a lot. So I think for me, I do like the option of being able to show and hide things. And I think it's great that Tableau now, we can actually have that option to show and hide on pretty much everything. And I know you told me that, Nina, because I did not know that. Rather than having to put things in containers to be able to show and hide them. But I think in terms of what I've done here, I think it was a good way to kind of move the story along, and use the containers to kind of reveal the next part of the story as I went through my presentation. And you'll notice here, I'm not just using containers to show and hide various elements. I've used nested containers in order to only show the ability to click through to the next section once you've clicked the previous section. So you'll notice there that I've put, the show and hide button inside the previous container. So then when you click on the button, you'll have the option to click on another button to show the next bit. I think the easiest way for me to kind of work that out in terms of building, because it can get quite a bit confusing, and I know I confuse myself a lot during my practice run building these containers. I would get a bit confused as to where the show and hide button was for particular containers, but I found that if I started backwards and worked my way to the top, it worked better. So you notice here in my Viz build, I started with the bottom, the last container and the last set of graphs, and then I worked my way up, and that allowed me to kind of create the chart at the bottom, or the container at the bottom, add the show hide button, and then bring in the next container and bring that show hide button into that next container. So I think, just in terms of using the show hide buttons in those containers, kind of map out what you want to achieve and how you want like the flow to look before kind of jumping in and doing it.
That's clever. I actually never noticed the number of times I've watched you do this. I never picked up that you did start from the bottom first.
Yeah, so when I first practiced, I did start from the top, and like I said, I was getting so confused because because the container, like the button that you needed for the next section, I hadn't created yet, and so
That's
I had
right.
to put in there. So and so I thought, okay, what if I start at the bottom? And I just found it a lot easier starting at the bottom and starting from the end and working my way back.
That's a handy tip. I'll remember that for next time I needed to do something like this. I mean, it's just, it's coming together. You're built at this point in the Viz, you're building, very much setting up, configuring these show and hide buttons right now. And in terms of the, the layout of the Viz, with the literacy rate chart on the right, on the left there, we went through iterations, or we went through ideas of how you best present this, the positioning, the placement of everything. And we talked about whether we should truncate the axis of a literacy rate to dramatize the difference between Australia and Cambodia. And, we had a chat about it. And in the end, you wanted to stick to the truth of it.
Yeah, I couldn't bring myself to truncate the axis,
You couldn't do it, could you? No. Yeah.
I couldn't do it. And I think it worked out. It worked out nicely, the way that it is with the dots up the top there, because I think that image and the flashlight, I think it was a real good focus point, and a lot of people were talking about it. So I think that was a good choice.
Absolutely. I agree. I think that would have not gone down well with at least one of the judges, as we found out on the day. So that was definitely a very, very wise choice. We're going to get to the flashlight in a minute, and anyone who's looked at your Viz will know that the little the image of the little girl with the flashlight shining on the difference between the two countries there at the top, which you'll put in a minute. But let's talk about how you built that, because you created that yourself. So I'm just interested to know, on behalf of the audience, like, what tool did you use? How did you do it? What's your secret?
Yeah, so what I did was I found an image of the girl, and then I just drew it out. I tend not to use images that I find online just for copyright purposes. So I just drew that girl, and then I put her into Figma, and then I used Figma to create that torch and that triangle, and that was probably like the hardest thing that I've done in this Viz. Like, literally, I'm not good with Figma at all. So creating that flashlight and the gradients and even the shape was quite hard to do. But I managed to get there in the end. So basically, it is just created in Figma and brought in as an image, as you can see there. So I'm bringing it in now and bringing in the alt text. And then with that, I actually put in the quote as part of that image as well. So it's just one background image that I needed to bring in. But it was just a bit of trial and error in terms of getting that flashlight. The girl was easy. It was just that flashlight that was just causing me a bit of a headache.
There you go. There it is at the top. You've just put it in. I mean, it just looks so, the impact is just so, it's just amazing. I really love
Yeah,
it.
I think it really elevates it and just brings it to a whole new level. I really like it
Absolutely.
too.
No, it's just really well done. I love it. The color scheme, everything just comes together, and that little last addition really brought it all together. I love it. So now, like, you're nearly done. In fact, I think you're done. And you just like try to check out all the buttons to see that they all work
Yeah, just to see if
as
it
they should
works.
be. And yeah, because there's heaps of clicks on here, and so I
Yeah.
appreciate that you're just doing that. And so, you know, having done this, and you know, just I know that after the Iron Viz session, when we walked around Data Village, you know, you got people walking up to you, you know, giving you feedback, compliments on what you've done and what they saw. So I know you've been getting a lot of that, but I'm just interested to know what was like the one piece of feedback, or, you know, a reaction that someone shared with you that really stuck out, and why.
Yeah, well, I think I don't think it was just one bit of feedback that has really stuck with me. It's just the overwhelming support that I've got, and just, you know, I've been getting messages on LinkedIn and Twitter, and people coming up to me afterwards at the conference, just thanking me for telling my story, because, you know, it resonated with a lot of people, and I didn't realize how many people out there it would resonate with. And they were just like, thank you so much for telling your story. You know, my parents were refugees, or I'm a refugee myself. It really resonated with me. So I think just being able to make that connection and showing people that, you know, that there are people out there that have the same experiences, that have gone through the same things as you, and you know, to be able to be up there on stage and telling that story, I think, yeah, it's a real privilege. So just you know, talking to people and learning about their background and their own story has just been amazing. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, it's been an absolute privilege for me to have worked with you, to be part of this. It was just wonderful. So I thank you for having done what you've
Yeah,
done, telling your
likewise.
story, and just, yeah, all around being an absolute star, or a data rock star, as we'd like to call you.
Thank you, Kimberly and Nina. That was fantastic. Now, hopefully you've enjoyed that conversation too. And if you haven't yet watched Will and CJ talk about their builds, they're available too. Go to Tableau's YouTube channel or tableau.com/iron-viz to find out more. Also, all the finalists' vizzes are available to download on Tableau Public, so you can reverse engineer and see some of the tricks they used. Finally, I hope this might have excited you to think about entering Iron Viz in 2023. Well, Iron Viz will be back, and believe me, whether you are a beginner or a seasoned pro, entering Iron Viz is an incredible way to advance your career. And hey, you might get to share the stage with me at Tableau Conference next year. With that, take care, and we'll see you soon.